Okay. Next off, we have Joe Fullerton, who is the Energy and Sustainability Manager at the San Mateo County Community College District. And Joe will be kind of taking forward some of the topics that Blake mentioned and talk about how to consider projects holistically, looking at the technological, financial, and operational factors. Joe, are you there?
I am. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Really a pleasure to be here and to be part of this conversation. Already learning a lot. So thanks, Blake, for that wonderful presentation and all those wonderful details. I'll be pressing those into my organization pretty soon here. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll start this presentation. Okay. All right, hopefully you all can see that okay.
Looks good, thank you.
Great. So as the Energy and Sustainability Manager at San Mateo Community College District, I'm fortunate to oversee an integrated strategy. I'm one of a few energy and/or sustainability folks in all the California community college system in the state. And for those of you who don't know, that's the largest higher education system in the nation. This year, anticipated through California Community College System is about 2.1 million students. So overall in the United States, community colleges, students are about almost 13 million. So we make up a good percentage of that whole pie. At San Mateo, we've been really fortunate to lead on the sustainability front and really think about sustainability holistically. And I want to share some of the experiences that we've had in our efforts to decarbonize. And we're not there yet. We're working on it. We have plans in place. We have strategies in place. We have tactical policies and procedures in place. But we also know that there's a bit of a slog out in front of us, including some pretty major decisions and investments that we need to make. So I'll talk about those in a moment. So just to give you an idea of what we're working with here, and we're not probably all too different from some of your municipal collection of buildings, where except for ours are a little more centralized. So we have three colleges: Kenyatta College, College of San Mateo, and Skyline College. Skyline and Kenyatta are co-terminus with the San Mateo County borders, and College of San Mateo is smack dab in the middle. A fair bit of square footage, about 1.6 altogether. Assignable square footage is actually like classroom square footage. So there's other miscellaneous square footage, hallways, et cetera, that we cover in there. We have a fair number of buildings, about 100, a little bit over now. A lot of parking spots, students, head count there. But here's some other interesting information about us. Gets down to the brass tacks of what we're dealing with. So we do have facilities condition indexes for all of our buildings and for our campuses overall. And this is one of the things that we use to not only guide decisions about where to make investments, but also about how and when to talk to our decision makers on when to make those investments. We have a pretty good idea of all of our major equipment about when the useful end of life of that is going to be and what the total cost of operations for replacing it with something that's either low carbon, no carbon, or high carbon is going to look like. Again, there's a lot of places where we have some gaps, but we're, with 1.6 million square feet, 100 roofs, 47 elevators, over 12,000 windows, almost 20,000 interior lights. The list goes on. When we get to the exterior of on our campuses, and if you've had the opportunity to come to any one of them, we're very fortunate. They're beautiful. They're well kept, exceptionally provisioned, and we do a really good job of taking care of them as a facilities team. And I say that with a high degree of humility, because it's the folks that work on my team, the 120 or so folks in our organization that are in there day in and day out, night in and night out, to ready our campuses for learning each day. So we have about 400 acres, 3,000 exterior lights, a bunch of sports fields, swimming pools, and a host of other issues and assets. One of the things that's going on right now is, we're at the tail end of the new construction portion of about a $500 million bond project. So we have a couple of new buildings. One that was built at Kenyatta College just finished this past year is a net zero energy. It should be a LEED Platinum building. We're going through the certification process right now, and that's our first. And that is the result of a combined strategy, not only of our design standards, which are based on as Title 24 as their basis, but also in the integrated project delivery method that we like to use through design build methodology. We have some other buildings that are coming on campus as well, another one at Kenyatta and one at Skyline. I'm not going to get into the details of those, but those are both super high efficient. We weren't able to get to net zero energy on both of those, but we're ready for it. In terms of emissions on campus, so our campuses have grown in terms of square footage, but enrollment has been decreasing. You can kind of see that greenhouse gas emissions growth starting to kind of edge up there in 2010. 2010 is the start of our second capital improvement program. We had a number of new buildings come on campus at that time and come on time. Our older buildings were pretty carbon free because they didn't have air conditioning. So when we started to add air conditioning and all kinds of advanced technical equipment for teaching and learning, as well as security, alarms, fire, life safety, et cetera, the energy footprint started to go up as well as the carbon. So in terms of the overall scope of higher education, we use the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. It's a mouthful. Another acronym for you to know, ASHE. And ASHE uses the Second Nature climate commitment as kind of their higher education climate action planning tool. If we were to drill down into San Mateo on this map, you'd notice a gap in these drops here. And we have yet to make an executive commitment to carbon neutrality or to really to zero net energy. Those are all operational goals right now. We're moving towards them regardless. And I'm sorry, I think that there's an opportunity here for anybody that's in the executive leadership role or is working within that executive function that has to take a stance. There are some operational things that can happen. A lot of the planning, a lot of the strategy, a lot of the project level stuff can happen. But until you have executive level buy-in, it's as you all know, it's really challenging to make any major gains. I don't really have to answer this. I mean, we just spent a whole day in the dark in the Bay Area. But here's just some of this is from, actually most of this is from last year or earlier this year before COVID-19, right? So, calling just on and on and on about the bad things that are coming with the climate crisis. And this is from last year, 2019, with, you can remember smoke impacting the Bay Area. That's getting worse and worse. We have the economic impacts as well associated with businesses, and we're seeing this obviously with COVID, but it is exacerbated by smoke and fire and damages. So one of the things that we're really thinking about not only is operational changes in our organization, but aligning with our organizational values is this idea to educate folks. So we have, as part of our sustainability strategy, we use the campus as a living laboratory. And this is true in our remote learning world right now, as it was when we were in the physical learning world just a couple months ago. So we have, students, faculty, staff, members of the community that are engaged in solving real world problems on campus. And we use this as a learning platform and as a way for people to engage in sustainability efforts and really to provide and promote both awareness, but also, more importantly, action to fight the climate crisis, to fight social equity, address social equity issues, and really ensure that we're meeting our economic and financial standards. So one of our earlier goals in terms of operations that I was able to kind of I got buy-in in was ZNE by 2030. And really we've started on this process of um, achieving decarbonization through a three-step process, which is optimize, um, electrify, and to decarbonize. You'll note here that I'm not using the word efficiency or making, efficacy. Optimization really has to do with that, at least for us, that combination of efficiency, comfort, ease of maintenance. We're talking about organizational succession planning, making sure that the folks that are employed by our organization in the future can take care of the things that we're talking about. Is talking about digitization of plans, of resources, any of that nuance and integrated knowledge that our facilities staff has. We want to make sure as much as possible that that's captured digitally and is moving forward. And then as we go, using that facilities condition index and other asset management tools, replacing things that burn, either as they're burning out or before. And then, of course, that will lead to decarbonization. We're not really pursuing those paths as a stepwise process, but rather to pursue them in parallel. So we have kind of a trident effort happening. You all know the scopes, but in terms for us, we're really pointing at scope 1 and scope 2, knowing that scope 3 is something we want to, address in the very near future. So we started to work on purchased goods. Obviously, business travel is not necessarily an issue right now, but it will be when we come back to some semblance of normalcy, as well as student and employee commuting and waste. So a lot of our scope 3 emissions have actually decreased as a result of, at least from an organizational perspective, as a result of COVID and the shelter-in-place processes that we're all in. But we still are running buildings. We still have equipment that needs to be operated. And because we do have students on campus, particularly, fire and life safety, faculty and students, police, fire, auto technicians, other types of programs that we're offering on campus right now. So I mentioned that we're trying to address the supply chain, and for those of you that have looked at this, that it's a pretty busy and hard to address area, but we know that it's also one of the potential areas for our decarbonization efforts. We also are breaking out building energy from campus energy, because there's kind of two different levels of systems for us there. We have centralized plants for heating and cooling, but we also have distributed heating and cooling and other apparatus on our buildings, our 100 buildings or so. When we looked at the greenhouse gas emissions reductions opportunities, these were the areas where we were going to get the best return for our investment from a carbon perspective. And these are very approximate numbers in terms of cost. We just wanted to group them for really to start the conversation with our executive leadership about what it was going to take. So, electric generation, this is solar and energy storage. And, there's a conversation ongoing about, time-dependent carbon intensity. So making sure that we, address carbon emissions at night when we may not be able to produce electricity. So that's where the storage comes in. We have boilers, our central plant. So electrifying those is going to be a rather large investment. As we do that, we also want to recover as much heat as possible and revamp our cooling system, our centralized cooling systems on campus, continuing with building optimization, et cetera. We are very advanced in terms of the EV charging station infrastructure. This number is a bit outdated. We'll have 100 EV charging stations on our campuses here pretty quick, expanding that with, before COVID-19, we're really thinking about, tripling and quadrupling the number of EV charging stations, just because the uptake of EVs in the Bay Area is so advanced. And that is in large part due to the nature of the Bay Area in terms of innovation, but also just from the incentives and other programs that are available for EV drivers. So we're seeing more and more EV drivers on our campuses, including and especially our students. They recognize the low maintenance and high value of those vehicles. In terms of, we wanted to break out also our decarbonization measures and what those opportunities were, and in a different way, kind of look at them like, okay, so where do we focus our energy, pun intended? Obviously, those two on the left-hand side are really important, but sustainable procurement is also, and this was actually just for office equipment. There's a other category of procurement items that we haven't actually categorized yet. So we'll work through that in about the next year. And I expect that piece of the pie to get much larger. In some organizations, that procurement piece can be 40 or 50%. So when we looked at, renewable energy and storage across all three campuses, and we do not purchase most of our electricity from our community choice aggregator. We are a direct access customer, so we get our electricity primarily from Constellation. And they, there are some requirements for them to meet the renewable portfolio standard, and we're pushing them to advance that a little bit more. But our electricity is really low cost. We're talking about, through direct access, it's about 12 cents per kilowatt hour at the low end and 16 cents per kilowatt hour at the high end. So that's markedly less than most folks pay. It actually makes generation projects really hard to do on our campuses because the barrier for entry, you basically have to have per kilowatt hour installed project for about 10 cents per kWh. But when we looked at all three campuses, we saw a project of potentially $24 million for over the parking lot shade structures with Division of State Architect approval and all the apparatus, electrical apparatus that goes with that. Pretty significant project, at least for us. We also looked at we're looking at boiler electrification, and our boilers were installed with our original campuses. So each one of our campuses was built in the 60s, 1962 to 68 in that time period. So those boilers are above and beyond their useful life, but they're actually, relative to their coefficient of energy, their coefficient is pretty high actually, and they operate individually at about 85% efficiency and deliver heat to all three of our campuses year round, I should note. And you'll see that in a moment. But anyway, the boiler electrification project we assume is going to take about $25 million. It's almost about $10 million per campus and has a pretty significant carbon reductions impact. And when we talk about this, this may seem a little bit shocking, but San Bruno, when this fire happened in our community, this is right next to Skyline College, and we actually housed some of the folks that were affected by this blast and this fire on our campus. Emergency service workers were based there to address this. My wife, as a therapist, was there counseling folks. So we had, this is really important for us as an organization to understand that these impacts aren't some far off thing. The dangers of natural gas and the disadvantages of using them are not some far off thing. They're evident right here in our own neighborhood. That heat recovery piece is there's a wide range of potential project costs here. One, because it kind of depends on the size of heat recovery we embark upon. It also depends on some integration of our boiler and heater systems that haven't been done. And so how we do that project really will impact the cost of it, and precisely where we invest, the actual heat exchange mechanism and all the pumps and how we integrate those. So there's a couple of different options that allows us to do that. But as you can see, the heating energy and cooling energy have this broad overlap here in the middle. And that's really where we can get a lot of recovery potential. And that has a pretty massive emissions reduction capability that comes along with it. not to mention those benefits to our overall performance on campus. So in terms of comfort, I mean, from a sustainable procurement method, again, we're just looking at office equipment, 2,500 tons or so CO2 equivalent. And we wanted to also look at, what does this actually mean operationally? How do, as one example, the greener alternative for our current, high volume toner cartridge is actually a lot less expensive. So for whatever printing that we do or will do in the future, we can do it for a lot less cost, a lot less impact on the environment. And we have some procedures and policies that are administrative policies that are going into place now that'll require us to default to these greener alternatives, that'll require us to consider and evaluate the local owned businesses, those that are minority, veteran, or women owned in particular. So that buying local and buying less is something that we're very committed to, and buying from partners that represent the diversity of our community. So we know that the building optimization is an effort. So this is where we go from that campus level kind of decarbonization interest to the building level. And building optimization varies greatly. Some buildings we have some great opportunities, others we do not. Some, when we start to modernize them, they'll actually increase in potential greenhouse gas emissions, because again, we'll be adding things like air conditioning. There's also likely to be some additions to building management systems and other types of technology equipment. Plug loads is another big one that's coming on our campuses. Everybody's just Wi-Fi, providing Wi-Fi is a pretty significant power source. So anyway, the building optimization component is something that varies widely from building to building, but we know it's a big piece of the pie. We also see that EV charging stations and other programs that we have in place are important as well. So, working on a myriad of programs and issues as we go along. So in terms of our internal process, and this is, of course, we're going to follow the plan, do, check, act process, but we really, we're aiming for this executive level support. But meanwhile, we're doing this researching and planning and prioritizing and reporting. So we know that we're going to have to come back to support, and we're going to have to go through this process time and time again. As leadership changes, as our board of trustees continues to have conversations, more so over time, as leadership at the college level changes. So this is not something that's stagnant. This is not something that just sits in place and we get to decarbonization and we're there. We understand that there's going to be an ongoing, reiterative, and highly integrated process for all this. And we want to incorporate it with our educational mission as well. If we're really going to truly put students first and focus on accessibility to high quality education for our community and preparing them for the future, preparing our students for the future, we have to focus on decarbonization.
Joe, you have 1 minute. Oh, perfect.
So this is my contact information. I'm glad, we have a lot of documents, a lot of policies, a lot of procedures already built, a lot of templates, resources available to folks. Some of them may be applicable to your municipality, others may not. But I encourage questions and would invite connection at any point in time. One thing that would be of huge help to me is just, find us on, check out our website, find us on Instagram. And, that's where we're sharing a lot of what we're doing and trying to communicate with the broader field of educators, sustainability gurus, and our community in general. So I encourage you to engage with us and to engage with me directly. I want to quickly give credit where credit is due. The primary components of this presentation were actually built by Fatima Abdul Kabir, who you saw her name in the initial slide. She is now at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. She was working on this as a Climate Corps Fellow. So that was this strategy is a manifestation of our organizational commitment to higher education and promoting and supporting sustainability learning in our classrooms and in our operations. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Joe. I think I've already seen some questions roll in, so we'll go ahead and move into the first Q&A session, and I'll reshare my title screen.
Great, and I've got some questions for you. For Nadia, I can't restart my video. I'm not sure about that, if that's something you'd help me with, but.